Welcome to the episode 2 of the Bhakti Girl podcast. We will look at the interesting history of the Bhagavad Gita arriving in the West. Each year in November to December, there is an auspicious day marked on the Bhakti Yoga calendar as Gita Jayanti. This occasion is celebrated as the day the Bhagavad Gita was spoken 5,000 years ago by Krishna with his dear friend Arjuna. The Bhagavad Gita was recorded in Sanskrit by Vedavyas in the 200,000 verse Mahabharata. There is a total of 18 parvas in this epic book, and the Bhagavad Gita is found in the Bhishma Parva. For thousands of years, the Bhagavad Gita was studied by scholars in India and loved by countless people. Meanwhile, on the rest of the planet, countries, languages, and civilizations were developing, diminishing, and expanding again. And then, in the 1600s, the English East India Company arrived in India. Formed as a trading company by prominent merchants and explorers, they came to India for textiles, gems, spices, to grow and export tea, and much more. In 1770, the East India Company sent a man named Charles Wilkins. His talent for learning languages was notable, and upon arriving in India, he quickly learnt Persian and Bengali. And then Charles Wilkins began studying under a Brahmin priest and learning Sanskrit. When Sir Warren Hastings, the governor of British India, as it was called, heard of Wilkins' ability to read Sanskrit, he encouraged him to work on a translation of the Mahabharata. Wilkins did not complete translating the whole Mahabharata, but portions were later published in 1785, with the most important part being his version of the Bhagavad Gita. Wilkins was not a devotee of Krishna, rather a talented linguist. It is unknown how much he personally understood that the Bhagavad Gita is an authentic conversation between the Supreme Lord and his dear friend. To the degree he realized this, his translations would be in alignment with the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna. But for the first time, the Bhagavad Gita was in English. His English translation was then translated by others into French in 1787 and German in 1802. Meanwhile, in America, there was a movement of individual scholars and thinkers who were searching for more wisdom. This movement became known as Transcendentalism. One famous such person was Ralph Waldo Emerson. In 1840, Emerson joined with others in publishing The Dial, a magazine dedicated to transcendental thought. The Dial published some of the first translations of the Indian scriptures, including the Bhagavad Gita. So now the Bhagavad Gita entered into the understanding of these thinkers who saw America as a land in which the individual could integrate the wisdom of old worlds into the new world. The Bhagavad Gita became an emblem of that wisdom. Emerson described the Gita. It was as if an empire spoke to us. Nothing small or unworthy, but large, serene, consistent, the voice of an old intelligence. Over time, many versions of the Bhagavad Gita were written and appeared in shops and libraries, but the compilers of these versions didn't present the factual position of Krishna. Many described the Supreme Lord as a mythological character. Meanwhile, in the 1960s, living in the holy town of Vrindavan in India was Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. He had been asked by his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati, to go to the West and take the teachings of Lord Krishna. In other words, bring Krishna to the West. He arrived in America in 1965, and after many setbacks, including having his partially completed manuscript of the Bhagavad Gita stolen and having to therefore start again, but he was able to have the Bhagavad Gita published in 1968 by the Macmillan Publishing Company, albeit a reduced version. But finally, the Bhagavad Gita, without misinterpretations and mistakes, had arrived in the West. Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada titled the book Bhagavad Gita as It Is. He was uniquely qualified to present this English translation and commentary on Bhagavad Gita, not just because he was a foremost Vedic scholar, but because he presented the Gita as it is, without the slightest taint of adulteration or personal motivation. Bhaktivedanta Swami is a great devotee of the Lord and translated it with love and devotion for Krishna and his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati. 3 years later, in 1971, the full version of the Bhagavad Gita was published. Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada wrote in the preface of the second edition, "When the Bhagavad Gita as it is was first published in 1968, the original manuscript was, unfortunately, cut short by the printing company to less than 400 pages, without illustrations and without explanations for most of the original verses of the Bhagavad Gita. In all of my other books, Srimad Bhagavatam, Sri Ishopanishad, etc., the system was that I gave the original verse, its English transliteration, word-for-word Sanskrit English equivalents, translations, and purports. This makes the book very authentic and scholarly, and the meaning self-evident. I was therefore not very happy when I had to minimize my original manuscript. But in 1971, when the demand for Bhagavad Gita as it is considerably increased, I was requested by many scholars and the printing company to present the book in its original form. Thus, the original manuscript of this great book of knowledge with full explanation was printed. Signed, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, 12th of May 1971, Sydney, Australia. The Bhagavad Gita as it is has been translated into over 65 languages, and the goal is for 108 languages on this planet. All glories to Lord Krishna's Bhagavad Gita.